Data breaches are no longer a question of if, but when. With a wealth of data on file, from student details to health and financial records, a breach at your school isn't just inconvenient, it's a reputational and financial risk you can't afford. I'm Emma from CT. I'm CT's education consultant. My background is teaching and learning, 18 years as a secondary school teacher, 7 years as a director of teaching and learning. And today I have the awesome job of translating tech to education and education to technology. My background is education, 18 years in the classroom, 7 years as a director of teaching and learning. And now I have the awesome job of helping to translate tech to education and education to tech. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you. I'm Steven Woodhouse. I'm the field CISO at Fortinet. Before going to Fortinet, I was the Executive Director and Chief Information Security Officer of the Queensland Department of Education. And I've been a CIO, CTO, CISO in the public and private sector for about the last 25 years.
Today, we are going to chat about the current security landscape in the education sector and just look at some challenges, trends, and how the sector itself is approaching cybersec, which really, in the past few years, has matured so much. Talk about cybersec itself, but how you've seen the changes in the education sector, both with them dealing with cybersec, but also the types of attacks that occur now in the education sector.
The landscape in the cybersecurity world is changing very quickly and very profoundly for the education sector. They're getting many more attacks happening. There's a recent ASD cyber threat report that came out this year for last year, and it highlighted that in the education and training sector, they're getting about 6.7% of all cyber incidents. That equates to about an incident every hour for the education and training sector. So my question would be, everybody thinking about that, what does it mean for you? What's going to happen in your world if it hasn't already? Because more likely, it probably will.
Yeah, and we've seen over the past year quite a few breaches that have happened in the education sector in Australia that made it to the news. There are obviously a lot that do happen that don't make it to the news because they're not necessarily notifiable breaches. And as well as reputational damage, you've got so many other risks that you take on when you don't look at cybersec in a really serious way. You've got financial implications. If the business goes down, the business goes down. So as well as reputational risk, you've got the financial risks that you take on because of business continuity issues. And you have to know how long can you be down for? How long can the business not operate for? And I know that from the teaching and learning perspective, there are, look, teachers are creative. We used to teach without tech. We could probably pick it up again. However, almost every single thing that is done on teaching and learning on the business side of operations is supported by tech. So if the business is down, it's down. That's one of your massive risks.
Sure, and that they are all valid risks. The other risks, the other things are people and what's happening to your students when you get breached. As an example, when I was at Queensland Education, there was a school where one of the support staff decided to send a mass email to the Year 7 teachers about Year 7 students, learning difficulties, domestic violence, etc. Unfortunately, she didn't send it to Year 7 teachers. She sent it to all of Year 7. So you can imagine the repercussion of that sort of thing going on. When private information about students gets into the wrong hands, it's a real problem, and the impact on them personally is massive.
Yeah, and I think we spoke about this when we did that webinar together and had a look at this topic in a lot more depth. one of the things that staff members don't think about is the impact on them personally. So one of that personal risk, that if there is some sort of a cybersec incident, the likelihood that your personal data gets out there is high. That could be your home address, that could be other information about you, could be bank details, it could be absolutely anything. And that can have far reaching impacts. And it's not so easy to clean up. And that's why I guess cybersec is a whole school problem. It's not just your business manager, your IT manager, your risk and compliance person, but it's something that the entire school needs to take pretty seriously. So, on that note, in terms of best practices for education, where do schools start? I'm going to assume that a lot of schools are, if they haven't already, they are looking at the different frameworks that exist, such as the Essential Eight, in order to benchmark their practices against them. But really, what foundation should they be building for this?
Sure. Um, I guess what I'll do first is I'm just going to list off a whole bunch of generic things that we all should be doing. And then I'm going to go very specifically to what I think schools should be doing. So the first one, and we've already sort of got to a little bit, is the education, training and awareness sort of stuff. That needs to happen. People need to be well educated about what's going on, what it means to click on a link, and what's a good password, and all of those sorts of things. And as you alluded to a little bit earlier, um, this is no longer an individual sport. This is a team sport. Everybody has to be involved in what's going on there. The next one is update and patch systems. So update and patch operating systems, applications. Don't forget the firmware on the bits of hardware, etc. But keep everything up to date. Use a zero trust philosophy, and by that I mean verify, don't trust. And I can go into a whole description about that, but I'll just leave it there for the moment because we don't have that long. But use a zero trust and don't trust anybody or any device for that matter. Have regular backups off-site, preferably. They can be cloud backups as long as they're disconnected from your environment. So if you have a ransomware thing happen, they don't get encrypted as well. Antivirus, malware sort of protectors. The old school way of doing that probably doesn't work anymore. There are certainly new solutions that can fit into that space. Monitor and analyze network traffic. If you can't see what's happening, you can't defend it. So understand what's going on in your environment. Have your policies, processes, and procedures, as you mentioned earlier. As part of that, develop a cyber incident response plan. And lastly, engage with industry experts to educate yourself and to understand what's going on. And I guess from there, what are the top things that I think a school needs to do? And in my order, how I think they need to do it is they need to have an ISMS, an information security management system, which is your policies, procedures, your standards of how things work, or at least the basis of that. So even if they only implement a statement of purpose and scope, a system inventory, a risk and threat assessment with a risk register and a security policy, they will have most things covered off. There's still work to be done, but they'll be in a much safer place. The second one, which is, as you said, Essential Eight. Essential Eight is the best tool you can use to implement and build out a base level protection for your school. It covers preventing attacks, it covers limit the extent of attacks, and it covers recovery of data in a simplistic way. And there's a multiple levels, there's 3 levels to Essential 8 now, and you can build on them, you can work on how you want to get there. But like any security endeavor, it costs money. And basically it's a choice. The more money you spend, the more security you get, sort of. The less money you spend, the less security you get. But whatever you spend, you will get a better outcome if you're using that money you're spending on security to also enable the business outcomes, in this case, learning outcomes. If you can tie it back to that, that will be a good outcome for you and for your organisation. And then lastly, is the training and awareness piece. You've really got to have that happen. 82% of all data breaches have a human element to them at various levels. You need to have people educated and participating in what you're doing.
And I think, I mean, I commonly say it, I probably sound a little bit like a broken record, but it's never about the technology. It's always about the people and process, and never more so here. Um, I think sometimes, schools find it difficult to know where to start. And it I mean, as you said, Central Eight's a great framework. All schools should be able to reach at least maturity level one. Schools, dependent on what they're willing to put in place, may be able to go up to ML2 in some areas, but it's unlikely in all areas. Obviously, there's so many different variables, and those include, BYOD devices. They include if you can or you can't implement things like MFA for students, which can be a little bit tricky at times. But the biggest prevention you do have, as you said, is getting training happening for staff. And there are so many easy ways and low cost ways to have that happen now. And, if people want to talk about that a little bit more, they can always get in touch with us. We can have that conversation. We have lots of schools that we support with all of these things. One of the things I think that I've seen in recent years in schools, and we know the cost of living is high. We know school fees are high. We know that schools have to manage, pretty tight budgets as well. And the question always is, is it affordable? I mean, you mentioned it's expensive to maintain good
Mhm.
security. Is it affordable for schools? Or, and the question that we sort of ask in relation to that is whether schools or educational institutions can actually afford to take the risk. And one of the things that I commonly see is IT assets being sweated, I think is the correct term, where things that are still working, keeping them around for as long as possible. And I completely understand how that enables the budget to go a little bit further. However, suddenly you're weighing up. It's like, those the scales, the balance. It
Yep.
used to be that you could pretty much keep your risk and your assets even. And now the longer you sweat the assets, the higher your risk goes. And that question of affordability is big. I don't know, Stephen, what do you see in this, or
Yeah,
what advice would you give here?
you're right. Everyone says it's expensive. Can I afford to do this? I guess the question is, can you afford not to do this? The point is, if you sweat assets or you're not patching systems or you're not updating things, you're exposing the organisation, you're increasing the risk level. Now, as part of what we spoke about earlier, having a risk register and a risk appetite gives you the direction of what you're going to spend your money on and what they want to do. What's important to the organisation? A balance of or return on investment of money spent is what you need to think about. As I said, if you can make it tie it to an improvement in a service delivery, you'll be in a better position. But even then, just balancing how much you're going to spend, how much it's going to cost you, or what's the repercussion of not spending that money. But having said all of that, some organisations I've seen just cannot get the funds. And that's where the conversation with the CFO or the board or whoever, the people with the money, needs to happen and they need to get some support. And this is where the conversation with industry experts can help them position that to get that funding.
Yeah, and I think there are two things that I've seen become leverage points in this area. One is doing proper IT blueprints or roadmaps. So you are really forward planning. You're thinking about what the next, say, 3 years looks like. We know that you never get past about a year of an IT roadmap being accurate because things change all the time. But at least you're making the plan that you need to for the spend on IT, and there's no ad hoc spend then that happens. Um, well, most of the time there's no ad hoc. You really know, well, you know, when requests come in, as long as there's no actual emergency, you know that when requests come in, you've got that end vision or end goal in mind. And you can say, you can actually push back at people and say, we're not spending on this now because remember, this is the plan and it doesn't fit into the plan. The other thing is really leveraging the licensing on things that you already have. So, for example, if you're a school and you have A5 Microsoft licensing, then you have access to the whole Microsoft Purview stack, which helps you do data lifecycle management, data sensitivity labeling. There's so many different protections in that stack that help you keep your data secure in the event of some sort of an incident. And yes, it does cost money to get that expert support to set it all up. But once it's set up, it runs. And there's another prevention as well. And there's no extra licensing cost there. You've got it as part of what you're already paying for. We see that also schools not even making the most of. We have so many schools with Fortinet firewalls, not always knowing what is available to them in this area with their Fortinet firewalls.
Yeah, look, and that's right. So getting value out of what you've already purchased, as you highlighted with the Microsoft example, or with a Fortinet firewall, a lot of people don't realise that every FortiGate is a ZTNA gateway. So I talked about zero trust. It gives you the opportunity to start implementing and using zero trust with that. But Fortinet builds the Forti fabric, so the fabric, so everything talks to each other and everything works together. So it shares information, etc., which sort of fits into the Gartner Magic Quadrant. That's why it's up in the top right-hand corner. So when you buy your Fortinet products, they talk to each other and they work to each other, so you can get the most value from them. Like years ago, we used to use best of breed. We buy X and we buy Y, and we get 10% functionality out of each because it was the best of breed. That's no longer the case. You can't afford to do that anymore, and you probably don't get the best result because they don't talk to each other. Having technologies that talk to each other, that share telemetry, will give you the best possible outcome for the least cost.
And one of the things that um, obviously is a big topic in education at the moment is AI and its uses in education. And having, had to learn a little bit about Fortinet and about the firewalls and about how AI plays across that space, I'd love it if you could explain just a little bit about how AI also works with the product to keep schools safe.
Yeah, so AI, from a Fortinet perspective, AI and the machine learning piece fits primarily into the security operations solutions, and it's used to identify sophisticated threats, I guess I'll call them, early in the kill chain and automate response activities across the fabric. And this is where the beauty of having all of these devices talking to each other. This can now work across all of these devices, across the whole fabric, and it um, automates the recovery and the response across that fabric. So it speeds up investigation and remediation. So where it used to take, well, you look at some of the statistics, days, even weeks for a soccer people to identify this, they're using AI and the Fortinet technologies, it can happen in seconds. So that's the real power of both AI and the Fortinet fabric.
Great. Thank you for that. One of the, so you've mentioned quite a few things now that help with the prevention or practices that help to prevent any sort of cybersecurity incident. It's, always prevention is better than cure. So looking, at the hardware you've got, making sure that you're patching, making sure you're leveraging products that talk together. I spoke about making sure you're using what's available to you in licensing. And we spoke about the people piece, but let's talk a little bit more about the people piece, as well as doing proactive training. I mean, schools are required to do anaphylaxis training, fire extinguisher training, and so on. There should definitely be cybersecurity training. Again, it can be in the form of an online course. It can be, someone coming in and can talk to people about protecting your data. And their phishing attacks seem to be one of the most common things that schools will implement because it does make people wake up and go, hey, I've got to be a little bit more careful about how I'm using things. I too have seen incidents in schools, like you explained. I've seen, this is a bit of a low tech example, but teachers printing out the medical data for an excursion because they didn't have any confidence in the app that had been chosen for the school, and then leaving that data sitting on, or those photocopies sitting on the photocopier, and where students could access it. I've also seen a spreadsheet with financial data shared with the wrong audience. So similar type incidents. The other thing with the people and process side of things is that on a higher level, any sort of risk committee should be going through some sort of tabletop exercise and a disaster recovery exercise at some point, checking what happens if you need to shut your systems off in order to respond to a cybersecurity attack. And that's what that tabletop exercise does as well, allows you to go through the different scenarios and how do you respond, what happens first, and so on. Anything else that you can think of, Stephen, in terms of prevention?
No, look, you covered it all. I guess my only comment would be with that is you will get people to uh, participate more and be more aware of what's going on if they have some sort of ownership in the process, in the policy, etc. So involving them in design and management of it will be of great benefit for you to achieve the outcomes you're trying to achieve.
And I think you were also right, very right before, that linking anything to do with cybersecurity and technology makes it more likely that people will do what's asked if you link it to an educational outcome of some sort, or an outcome the school's trying to achieve. And one that I talk to schools about quite regularly is the consistent use of their systems. Now, when we talk about it more in terms of having the data that they want available to them to be able to support their students better, support their students to grow. But it's exactly the same reason um, for using those systems in the way that they're supposed to be used, so that the data exists in the system against the child, securely protected by the system, and not sitting in somebody's SharePoint, OneDrive, Google Drive, etc. Achieves the same outcome, ironically, but also prevents any data breach at the same time. So those, yes, you're right. Explaining the why always brings people on that journey.
Yeah, look, an example of what you're talking about and what I was trying to get to earlier is the same telemetry that you use to protect your environment uh, can be to highlight how good your service is, and then uh, improve your service delivery to your students. Or many students know what they're doing, where they're going, what's happening with them. You're not trying at this point to control them, but you do know what's going on. So a teacher can use that information to manage the students in the classroom. So there's a lot of use cases you can pull out of using um, cybersecurity technologies and telemetry to improve the outcomes as well as protecting the organisation.
Awesome. Thank you for today's chat. That was really interesting and informative. I think one thing we can put out there is, if anybody would like to talk a bit more about whether it's road mapping, whether it's the essential eight and how to get there, whether you'd like us to CT to support you with some sort of a security review so that you know where your gaps are and to help you figure out where to start, or you'd like to learn more about Fortinet products as well, please just reach out. And we are going to be talking a little bit more in the coming months about AI in education, on the front end in terms of the way that it supports efficiencies in working, in teaching and learning, but also on the back end a little bit more, like we've spoken about today, and about how the AI works in the Fortinet stack, about how AI uh, is leveraged again to create efficiencies on the back end of IT as well. If you'd like to learn more about what we've spoken about today in terms of cybersecurity in the education sector, please check out our on demand webinar with Steven, which is on our website. We will add a link into the description so it's easy for you to find.